I watched my 8-year-old daughter Sophie run back to me with tears streaming down her face, her small hands trembling as she clutched the hem of her favorite purple dress. Just moments before, she had been beaming with pride, twirling to show off the sparkly flowers she had saved 3 months of allowance to buy. Now, Diana, my sister, stood 20 feet away, with that familiar smirk, having just announced loud enough for every guest to hear that there was no room for discount store kids at this party. Sophie's white sandals shuffled against the pristine patio stones as she buried her face against my chest. Grace. My wife stepped forward with fire burning in her dark eyes, her jaw set in determination I had not seen since our wedding day. 3 weeks earlier, my phone had buzzed while I was grading geometry tests at Jefferson High School where I teach math. Diana's name flashed on the screen, which surprised me since we rarely spoke outside of holidays. Her voice carried that particular tone I remembered from childhood, the one that made me feel like I was always falling short of some invisible standard. Benny, I wanted to invite you and your family to Tyler and Madison's 10th birthday party, she had said, though her enthusiasm felt rehearsed. It's going to be quite the celebration at our new place in Riverside Heights. I knew Riverside Heights well, the gated community where houses started at 7 figures, and the HOA fees cost more than my monthly mortgage. Diana had moved there after marrying Robert, a successful real estate developer who specialized in luxury commercial properties. Their wedding 5 years ago had been a lavish affair that made Grace and me feel like spectators at someone else's life. That sounds wonderful. I replied, genuinely happy that Sophie would get to see her cousins. She's been asking about Tyler and Madison since Christmas. Perfect. Now I should mention there's a bit of a dress code for the children. Diana continued, her voice taking on that instructional quality she used when explaining things to people she considered less informed. Presentation really matters at these social gatherings, you understand. The neighbors and Robert's business partners will be attending, so we want everyone looking their absolute best. Something cold settled in my stomach. Grace and I lived comfortably on our combined salaries. My teaching income and her earnings from managing Little Sprouts daycare covered our needs and allowed us to save modestly for Sophie's college fund. But comfortable and country club elegant were entirely different categories. Of course, I managed. Sophie will look beautiful. I'm sure she will, Diana said with a laugh that felt like glass breaking. Children have such natural charm when they're not spoiled by too many material things. After I hung up, Grace found me staring at the phone in our modest kitchen. Our mortgage payment on our 3-bedroom ranch house equaled what Diana probably spent on fresh flowers each month. The contrast had never bothered me before, but something about that conversation made it feel like a chasm. What did she want? Grace asked, her intuition picking up on my mood. Tyler and Madison's birthday party. Big affair at the new house. Grace's expression softened. She understood my complicated relationship with Diana better than anyone. After our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago, the reading of their will had revealed the stark difference in how they viewed their children's futures. Diana received the family home and the bulk of their savings, while I inherited their old Toyota and some personal items. Mom and Dad had always assumed Diana needed more help because of her expensive tastes, while they trusted that Grace and I would build our own happiness regardless of material advantages. Sophie will be thrilled, Grace said, wrapping her arms around my waist. She loves those kids even if we only see them on holidays. Diana mentioned something about a dress code. Grace pulled back to look at me. For children. Apparently presentation matters when business partners are involved. I watched Grace's expression shift through several emotions before settling on determination. Then, we'll make sure our daughter feels confident and beautiful, just like always. The next 3 weeks became a careful balance of preparation and anxiety. Sophie was overjoyed about the party, especially when Grace took her shopping for a new dress. They returned home with Sophie practically glowing, carrying a bag from Target, like it contained treasures from a royal vault. Look, Daddy! Sophie had burst through the front door, pulling out a purple dress, with delicate, sparkly flowers embroidered across the bodice. Grace let me pick it out myself, and it was on sale, so we had money left for new sandals too. The white sandals from Payless were simple, but clean with small buckles that Sophie practiced fastening herself every day, leading up to the party. She wore the entire outfit around the house for an hour that evening, practicing her curtsy and asking if she looked like a princess. "You look perfect, sweetheart," I told her, meaning every word. The joy radiating from her face was worth more than any designer label. But as the party date approached, I found myself remembering other family gatherings where Diana's comments had stung more than they should. The Christmas, when she asked if we needed help buying Sophie's gifts. The Easter, when she mentioned how refreshing it was to see children who weren't spoiled by too many toys. The graduation party, where she introduced us to her friends as her brother, who chose the noble profession of teaching. Each comment had been delivered with a smile, technically supportive, but carrying an undertone that made me feel like a character in her story about overcoming humble beginnings. Grace noticed my growing tension. "You know what she's doing, right?" she said one night as we cleaned the dinner dishes. "Making sure everyone knows she's moved up in the world. Using us to prove it." Grace's voice was calm but firm. She wants her new friends to see where she came from versus where she is now. Maybe I'm overthinking it. No, you're not. And Sophie deserves better than being someone's prop for social advancement. I knew Grace was right, but Diana was still family. Our parents would have wanted us to maintain relationships with our extended relatives, especially for Sophie's sake. Tyler and Madison were good kids who genuinely loved their cousin, even if they lived in a completely different world. The night before the party, I found Sophie in her room practicing introducing herself to adults, something Grace had suggested might help her feel more confident. "Hello, my name is Sophie, and I'm 8 years old," she said to her reflection in the mirror. "Thank you for inviting me to your beautiful party." My heart ached, watching her prepare so carefully for an event that should have been simple childhood fun. Climactic twist. The next morning, as we loaded into our 10-year-old Honda to drive to Riverside Heights, I received a text from Diana that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait for everyone to see how different our families have become. Robert's partners are fascinated by authenticity versus aspiration." I realized then that this wasn't just a birthday party. This was Diana's opportunity to showcase her transformation by using us as a deliberate contrast. The wrought iron gates of Riverside Heights opened automatically as we approached Diana's address. Sophie pressed her face to the window, mesmerized by the perfectly manicured lawns and houses that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. Each property sat on at least 2 acres, separated by stone walls and professionally designed landscapes that probably required full-time maintenance crews. "It looks like a fairy tale," Sophie whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "It's certainly impressive," Grace replied, though I detected the careful neutrality in her voice that meant she was managing her own reactions. Diana's house appeared around a curved driveway, lined with flowering trees that had clearly been planted for maximum visual impact. The colonial-style mansion featured white columns, multiple chimneys, and windows that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. A circular driveway led to a covered entrance, where 2 young men in black pants and white shirts directed arriving vehicles. "Valet parking," I muttered, suddenly conscious of our Honda's dented bumper and faded paint. One of the attendants approached with a professional smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Harrison celebration." Harrison. Diana had taken Robert's last name, and apparently expected everyone to use it at formal events. I handed over our keys, noting how the young man's expression remained perfectly polite, despite the obvious condition of our vehicle. Sophie hopped out, clutching her carefully wrapped gift, a homemade photo album she and Grace had created together. The album contained pictures from family gatherings, drawings Sophie had made for her cousins, and handwritten notes about her favorite memories with Tyler and Madison. She had spent hours choosing the perfect ribbon and writing their names in her best cursive handwriting. The backyard revealed the true scale of Diana's transformation. A professional catering tent dominated one corner of the expansive lawn, complete with uniformed servers carrying silver trays. Round tables covered in crisp white linens were arranged around a swimming pool that looked like it belonged at a resort. Balloon arches, in gold and white, framed different activity areas, and a small stage had been erected for what appeared to be live entertainment. Children ran across the grass, wearing outfits that made Sophie's careful selection look humble by comparison. I recognized brands from mall windows that Grace and I had walked past without entering. Polo shirts with tiny embroidered logos, dresses with designer labels visible on small price tags, still attached shoes that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Diana appeared at our elbows, before we had taken 10 steps, wearing a flowing sundress that complemented the party's color scheme perfectly. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that suggested professional assistance, and her makeup looked like it had been applied for a magazine photo shoot. "Benny Grace, you made it." She embraced us with air kisses that kept her lipstick intact. "And sweet Sophie, don't you look charming in your homemade creation?" Sophie beamed at what she interpreted as a compliment, missing the subtle emphasis on certain words that made my jaw clench. "Thank you for inviting us," Grace replied smoothly. "The party looks absolutely beautiful." Robert spared no expense for the twins' milestone birthday. Diana said with obvious pride, "It's so important to mark these special occasions properly. Don't you think children remember these moments their entire lives?" As she spoke, Diana positioned herself to guide us toward a specific area near what appeared to be a service entrance. I noticed other families being greeted near the main pool area, where a photographer was capturing candid moments of children playing elaborate lawn games. "Let me introduce you to some of our neighbors." Diana continued leading us toward a group of adults, holding crystal glasses filled with what looked like champagne. "Patricia Edward, this is my brother Benny, and his wife Grace, and their daughter Sophie." Patricia appeared to be in her 60s, wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed expensive simplicity. Edward stood beside her in golf attire that looked freshly pressed. Both studied us, with the polite interest reserved for curiosities rather than equals. "How lovely to meet you," Patricia said, her voice carrying the refined accent that came from private education and country club memberships. Diana has told us so much about her family background. Family background. The phrase hung in the air like a subtle explanation for our presence. "It's refreshing to see children who aren't spoiled by material excess," Edward added, nodding toward Sophie, who was carefully holding her gift. "So much character building in learning to appreciate simple things." Sophie looked confused by the adults' conversation, but she maintained her polite smile, as Grace had taught her. Meanwhile, I noticed Tyler and Madison approaching from across the lawn, both wearing matching outfits that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Sophie," Madison called out, running toward us with genuine excitement. "I can't believe you're finally here." The contrast between the children's authentic happiness and the adults' careful social positioning was stark. Tyler and Madison hugged their cousin enthusiastically, completely unconcerned with her Target dress or Payless sandals. "Did you bring the photo album you told us about?" Tyler asked, looking at Sophie's carefully wrapped gift. "Yes, I made it myself with pictures of all of us," Sophie replied, her excitement returning as she focused on her cousins rather than the strange adult conversations. "That sounds absolutely precious." Diana interjected her voice, carrying that particular tone I was beginning to recognize as performative warmth. "Handmade gifts have such sentimental value, don't they? So much more meaningful than expensive store-bought items." She gestured toward an elaborate gift display near the main party area, where wrapped packages created a small mountain of obviously expensive presents. Professional gift wrapping, designer bags with ribbon handles, and boxes that suggested electronics and luxury items for 10-year-olds. "Sophie, why don't you put your gift over there?" Diana pointed toward a smaller card table positioned away from the main display. "We have different areas for different types of contributions." Sophie's face fell slightly as she realized her gift was being separated from the others, but she obediently walked toward the designated table. I watched her small shoulders straighten as she carefully placed her album among a few other modest packages that had clearly been relegated to the same space. Grace's hand found mine and squeezed with enough pressure to convey her mounting anger without alerting the nearby adults who were watching this social theater unfold. "Robert will be so pleased to meet you." Diana continued scanning the crowd until she spotted her husband near the bar area. He's been fascinated by stories about authentic American families who maintain traditional values despite economic limitations. Economic limitations. Diana had reduced our life choices to a euphemism that suggested we were doing our best despite unfortunate circumstances, rather than living according to different priorities. Climactic twist. Patricia leaned closer to Grace with conspiratorial familiarity. "I hope Diana warned you about the photographer capturing family moments today. She mentioned wanting documentation of how far she's traveled from her humble beginnings. Such an inspiring story of social mobility, don't you think?" My stomach dropped as I realized Diana had been setting up this contrast for weeks, positioning our family as supporting characters in her narrative of transformation. The next hour passed in a series of small humiliations disguised as polite conversation. Diana guided us through introductions that consistently emphasized our differences, rather than our relationships. We met Robert's business partners, who were told we represented the authentic working-class values that kept America strong. We encountered neighbors who learned about Diana's remarkable journey from modest circumstances to social prominence. Each introduction felt like being displayed in a museum exhibit about economic mobility. Sophie remained blissfully unaware of the adult undercurrents, focused instead on exploring the elaborate party setup with Tyler and Madison. They showed her the professional face-painting station, the elaborate bounce house designed to look like a castle, and the ice cream sundae bar, with dozens of toppings arranged in crystal bowls. "Can we go swimming?" Sophie asked, looking longingly at the pristine pool where several children were playing Marco Polo, under the supervision of 2 lifeguards. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, but Diana immediately interjected. "Actually, the pool area is reserved for children whose parents signed the liability waivers in advance," she said with apologetic firmness. "Insurance requirements, you understand. So many regulations when you own property like this." Sophie's face fell, but Tyler and Madison quickly suggested alternative activities. They led her toward the lawn games, where several children were playing an elaborate version of croquet with professional equipment. I watched Diana orchestrate the separation of activities with military precision. The pool remained reserved for children whose families clearly belonged in her social circle. The lawn games became a secondary option for everyone else. Sophie found herself gravitating toward a small group of children who seemed less interested in the expensive activities and more focused on simple conversation. Grace had been unusually quiet, observing Diana's performance with the calculating expression she usually reserved for difficult parents at her daycare. I could sense her building towards something, but Diana seemed oblivious to the warning signs. "You know, it's fascinating how different our children's experiences have been," Diana said to a small group that included Patricia and Edward. "Tyler and Madison have had every advantage from birth. Private tutors, international travel exposure to culture, and refinement. It really shapes their expectations for life, doesn't it?" She gestured toward Sophie, who was laughing with 2 other children over a simple game of hopscotch they had drawn in chalk on the patio stones. Other children learn to find happiness in simpler things. It's actually quite admirable, the resilience that comes from limited options. Limited options. I felt my hands clench into fists as Diana reduced Sophie's joyful personality to a coping mechanism for deprivation. "Diana," Grace said quietly, her voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded storms. But Diana was warming to her theme, encouraged by the attentive expressions of her audience. "I sometimes worry that privilege might rob children of that authentic appreciation for small pleasures. When everything comes easily, do they develop the same character? It's such an interesting social experiment." Patricia agreed. Having both types of families here today really illustrates the contrast. Social experiment. We had become test subjects in Diana's demonstration of class mobility. Sophie approached the main gift table where Tyler and Madison were opening their mountain of presents. She carried her photo album, hopefully clearly wanting to share her creation during the gift opening ceremony. Several children gathered around to watch the twins unwrap electronic devices, designer clothes, and toys that looked like they required instruction manuals. "This is from Sophie," Madison announced, holding up the carefully wrapped album. "She made it herself." "How wonderful," Diana said in the voice adults use when children show them finger paintings. "Handmade gifts are so personal." She took the album from Madison and set it aside without opening it, gesturing instead toward the next expensive package in the pile. "Let's see what else we have here." She continued dismissing Sophie's hours of careful work as effectively as if she had thrown it in the trash. Sophie stood frozen beside the table, her hands beginning to tremble as she realized her gift had been rejected in favor of store-bought alternatives. The other children continued opening presents with excited squeals, but Sophie had been excluded from the celebration of her own contribution. "Actually, I think the handmade gifts should go on the appropriate table," Diana announced loudly enough for the nearby adults to hear. "We want to make sure everything is properly organized." She pointed again toward the card table where Sophie's gift had been originally relegated, making it clear that her creation did not belong among the legitimate presents. "But I wanted Tyler and Madison to see the pictures," Sophie said in a small voice that broke my heart. "Next time, perhaps you'll dress them properly for the occasion," Diana replied, her voice carrying across the party area. "Presentation is so important when children attend social gatherings like this. We want everyone to feel comfortable with the standards being maintained." Sophie's hands shook visibly as the words hit her. The sparkly purple dress that had made her feel like a princess suddenly seemed shabby and wrong. Her white sandals looked cheap against the pristine patio stones. Every adult within hearing distance turned to look at the little girl whose appearance had just been publicly criticized by her own aunt. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, while Sophie processed the humiliation. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked down at her favorite outfit, then back at Diana's perfectly composed face. "Diana," Grace said again, stepping forward with lethal calm. But Diana was not finished. "There's simply no room for discount store kids at this party," she announced, apparently unaware that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "Standards matter when you're trying to maintain a certain social position." Sophie burst into tears and ran toward me, her small body shaking with the kind of deep sobs that come from unexpected betrayal. I caught her against my chest, feeling her heart racing as she buried her face in my shirt. The party conversations had stopped. 20 adults stood frozen in their elegant clothes, witnessing a child being deliberately humiliated by a family member who should have protected her innocence. Grace moved forward like a force of nature, her dark eyes blazing with fury that made the air around her seem electric. She stopped directly in front of Diana, close enough that her voice would carry to every guest, but quiet enough to emphasize the devastating precision of her words. "Diana," she said with the calm that preceded earthquakes, "you've become everything Mom hated." Climactic twist. The silence that followed Grace's words was absolute and devastating. Every family member present knew the truth of that statement. Our mother had been a humble woman who measured worth by kindness rather than status, who would have been appalled by Diana's treatment of a child. But Robert suddenly stepped forward from the crowd of witnesses, his face flushed with what looked like shame and anger. "Grace is absolutely right," he announced to the shocked gathering. "Diana, I've been watching you become someone I don't recognize, and I'm disgusted by what just happened to Sophie." The aftermath of Grace's words created ripples that transformed the entire gathering. Diana stood frozen in apparent shock that someone had publicly called out her behavior, especially using our mother's memory as the standard for judgment. The elegant party guests shifted uncomfortably suddenly, forced to witness a family confrontation that revealed the calculated cruelty beneath the social performance. Robert's unexpected support of Grace's statement sent another shockwave through the crowd. He approached us with obvious distress, his face flushed with embarrassment that suggested this was not the first time Diana's behavior had troubled him. "I owe you an apology," he said, quietly kneeling down to Sophie's eye level. "What just happened was wrong, and you didn't deserve that." Sophie peeked out from against my chest, her tear-stained face showing confusion rather than anger. Children her age struggled to understand adult cruelty, especially from family members who were supposed to protect them. "Your dress is beautiful," Robert continued gently, "and I bet that photo album you made is the most thoughtful gift anyone brought today." His kindness seemed to restore some of Sophie's confidence. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and managed a small smile. Patricia approached our group with an expression I hadn't expected. Instead of the polite distance she had maintained earlier, she looked genuinely concerned and somewhat angry. "Excuse me, Grace," she said formally. "I believe I owe you some information that might be important." Grace looked surprised, but nodded for Patricia to continue. "Earlier this morning, I was walking my dog past Diana's house when I overheard her on the phone in her garden." Patricia explained, her voice carrying clearly to the nearby guests. "She was discussing today's party with someone, and I'm afraid she said some disturbing things about your family." Diana's face went pale as Patricia continued. She specifically mentioned inviting her charity case brother to show guests where she came from versus where she is now. She also described your daughter as a perfect example of what happens to children without proper advantages. The gathered adults began murmuring among themselves as the calculated nature of Diana's behavior became clear. What had seemed like unfortunate social awkwardness was revealed as deliberate manipulation designed to enhance Diana's image at our expense. Furthermore, Patricia continued with the precise diction of someone accustomed to being heard. "Diana has been telling neighbors that her entire family died in the same accident that took your parents. She's been positioning herself as a tragic figure who overcame loss through personal strength and advantageous marriage." My blood turned cold as I processed this information. Diana had been erasing us from her personal history, denying our existence to gain sympathy and admiration from her new social circle. "That's impossible," I said, though even as I spoke, I realized it explained some of the strange reactions we had received from Diana's neighbors. "I'm afraid it's quite true," Patricia replied. "She's also been claiming that she's self-made without any family support or inherited advantages. Several of us have heard variations of this story at different social gatherings." Grace's expression shifted from anger to something colder and more dangerous. "She's been lying about our parents' deaths." "Not just lying," Patricia said with obvious distaste. "Exploiting them for social capital while pretending you don't exist." Robert pulled his phone from his pocket and began scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. "Diana, is this true? Have you been telling people that Grace and Benny died with your parents?" Diana finally found her voice, but it came out as a defensive whisper. "People make assumptions, and sometimes it's easier to let them believe what makes sense for the social dynamic. You told our neighbors that we were dead." I asked, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. "You don't understand the pressure of maintaining relationships at this social level," Diana replied, her composure cracking. "People expect certain backgrounds, and complicated family situations can be difficult to explain." "Complicated family situations," Grace repeated with dangerous quiet. "You mean having a brother who teaches children and a sister-in-law who cares for toddlers?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another guest, who clearly hadn't expected to encounter a family crisis. A tall man in an expensive suit approached our group with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Sorry I'm late," he called out cheerfully. "Traffic from downtown was murder." Diana's face went from pale to completely white as she recognized the new arrival. "James," she whispered. Our cousin James stood before us, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, and the kind of confident smile that came from professional success. I hadn't seen him since our parents' funeral, when he had been finishing his law degree and starting his career as a prosecutor. Benny Grace. He embraced us warmly, completely, ignoring Diana's obvious distress. I've been trying to reach you for months about the estate situation. Your sister has been very difficult to contact. Estate situation. I felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. What estate situation? Grace asked. James looked genuinely surprised. The probate issues with your parents' will. There have been some irregularities in how the assets were distributed, and I've been working with the court to get them resolved. He pulled a legal envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. Diana was supposed to provide your contact information months ago, so we could discuss the necessary corrections. Corrections. I asked, though I was beginning to suspect what James meant. Your parents' attorney made some errors in the original probate filing. You were supposed to inherit equal shares of the estate, including the house. Diana received temporary custody of the assets pending resolution, but she was legally required to distribute everything equally once the paperwork was corrected. Climactic twist. Tyler and Madison suddenly appeared beside us, having overheard enough of the adult conversation to understand that something serious was happening. Mom, Madison said quietly to Diana, we heard you talking on the phone yesterday about Uncle Benny and Aunt Grace. You said they were embarrassing, and you wished they would stay away from important events. We don't think that's nice. Tyler nodded in agreement, then walked over to Sophie and took her hand. We like our cousin exactly the way she is, and we think her dress is prettier than anything in the stores. The combination of James's legal revelations and the children's innocent honesty created a moment of perfect clarity. I looked around at the gathered adults, many of whom had been unknowing participants in Diana's elaborate deception, and realized this was my opportunity to set the record straight. Not just for my family's dignity, but for the memory of parents who had valued truth above social advancement. I gently set Sophie down and took her small hand in mine, feeling her fingers squeeze back with the trust that children place in adults who promise to protect them. Grace moved to my other side, her presence giving me strength for what needed to happen next. I think everyone deserves to hear the truth about our family, I said, clearly projecting my voice with the same authority I used when teaching reluctant teenagers about mathematical principles they didn't want to learn. The party guests formed an impromptu circle around us, their expensive clothes and champagne glasses, creating an incongruous backdrop for the family truth session that was about to unfold. Diana and I grew up in a modest but loving home with parents who measured success by character rather than bank accounts. I began focusing on the faces of people who had been fed carefully constructed lies. Our mother taught elementary school for 30 years and spent her summers volunteering at the local food bank. Our father worked construction and coached Little League baseball every weekend for 2 decades. I paused to let that image settle in the minds of people who had been told Diana emerged from tragedy as a self-made success story. They were the kind of people who invited lonely neighbors for holiday dinners and helped struggling families pay their utility bills without ever expecting recognition or gratitude. They believed that kindness was the only currency that mattered in life. Sophie looked up at me with growing confidence, apparently sensing that the adult conversation was shifting in a positive direction. Tyler and Madison remained beside her, their innocent support, providing a stark contrast to their mother's calculated behavior. When they died 2 years ago, Diana inherited the family home and most of their savings because our parents believed she needed more help to find her way in life. They trusted that Grace and I would build our own happiness regardless of material advantages. I looked directly at Diana, who was staring at the ground like a child caught in an elaborate lie. They never could have imagined that their generosity would be used to fund a lifestyle designed to erase their memory and deny the existence of their son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. Grace stepped forward to continue the story, her voice carrying the warm authority that made 3-year-olds trust her with their fears and dreams. Our parents would have been heartbroken to see a child humiliated for wearing a dress she chose with pride and love. They would have been the first adults to admire Sophie's handmade gift and ask to see every single photograph she selected for her cousins. She gestured toward Sophie, who stood straighter, as she realized the adults were finally seeing her as a person rather than a social accessory. They taught us that celebrating children means honoring their efforts and kindness, not judging them by price tags or social positioning. They would have been furious to learn that their own daughter used their deaths as sob stories to gain sympathy from strangers. James opened his legal envelope and withdrew several official documents. Actually, there's more to this story that everyone should understand. Diana has been managing estate assets that legally belong to both siblings, and she's been required by law to provide equal distribution for almost 6 months. He handed me a document that showed numbers I couldn't immediately process. Your parents' house appreciated significantly in value after their deaths, and there were several insurance policies Diana didn't mention during the original probate process. You're owed approximately $80,000 in assets that should have been distributed immediately. $80,000. Enough to pay off our mortgage and establish Sophie's college fund, with room left over for family trips, and the kind of security that would let us sleep peacefully at night. Diana has been legally required to contact you about this distribution since March. James continued, but she's been avoiding my calls and refusing to provide your contact information to the court. The gathered adults began murmuring among themselves as the scope of Diana's deception became clear. She had not only lied about our deaths and stolen credit for our parents' values, but she had also been illegally withholding money that belonged to us. Patricia stepped forward again, her earlier politeness replaced by obvious disgust. Diana, I think you need to understand something important. Several of us have been considering you for board positions and social leadership roles based on the personal history you shared with us. That consideration is obviously withdrawn. Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their expressions showing the kind of social rejection that would follow Diana for years in her carefully cultivated community. Robert pulled out his own phone and began making a call. I'm contacting our attorney about emergency separation proceedings, he announced to the gathering. I will not have my children growing up in a home where family members are treated with this kind of cruelty. Climactic twist. Eleanor, an elderly woman in an elegant wheelchair, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the gathering, rolled forward with the commanding presence that comes from decades of philanthropy and social leadership. Excuse me, my dear, she said to Grace with genuine warmth, but I believe we need to discuss your daycare program. I've been looking for authentic community organizations to support through my foundation, and Patricia has told me remarkable things about your work with working families. Diana, you can forget about the charity board position we discussed. I'm much more interested in supporting people who understand the difference between genuine service and social performance. Eleanor's announcement sent another shockwave through the gathering that fundamentally altered the social dynamics Diana had spent months constructing. The elderly philanthropist commanded instant respect from everyone present, her reputation for supporting meaningful community work carrying more weight than all of Diana's social maneuvering combined. Eleanor, what are you doing here? Diana asked weakly, apparently recognizing that her carefully planned social performance had just been completely derailed. Patricia invited me weeks ago to meet the young woman she described as running an innovative daycare program for working families. Eleanor replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone accustomed to cutting through pretense. She mentioned that Diana's sister-in-law was doing remarkable work despite limited resources, and I wanted to assess potential funding opportunities. Grace looked stunned by this unexpected turn of events. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman. The elderly woman replied with a warm smile. I run a foundation focused on supporting early childhood education programs that serve underrepresented communities. Patricia has been telling me about your creative approaches to helping working parents afford quality childcare. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. Grace has been transforming her daycare program to include evening and weekend care for parents who work non-traditional schedules. She's also been providing free meals for children whose families struggle with food insecurity. I felt a surge of pride watching Grace be recognized for work that truly mattered. Her daycare had become a lifeline for families in our neighborhood, providing not just childcare, but genuine community support that helped parents succeed, despite economic challenges. Eleanor, I think there's been some misunderstanding, Diana interjected desperately. The charity board position we discussed was based on my own community leadership and philanthropic vision. Yes, I remember our conversation, Eleanor replied coolly. You described yourself as someone who had overcome family tragedy through personal strength and advantageous marriage. You specifically mentioned having no living relatives to complicate your charitable focus. The irony was devastating. Diana's lies about our deaths had cost her the very social advancement she had been pursuing through her deception. However, Eleanor continued, after spending the last hour observing your treatment of your actual living relatives, I'm particularly interested in supporting people who demonstrate authentic compassion rather than perform charity. She turned her attention back to Grace with obvious warmth. My dear, would you be interested in discussing expansion funding for your program? I'm thinking we could help you serve significantly more families while maintaining the personal touch that makes your work so effective. Grace looked overwhelmed by the sudden shift from humiliation to recognition. That would be incredible. We have a waiting list of 40 families who need care, but can't afford our current rates. Excellent. We'll schedule a proper meeting next week to discuss details. Robert finished his phone call and rejoined the conversation with grim determination. My attorney is filing emergency separation papers on Monday. Diana, I want you to understand that Tyler and Madison will be spending considerable time with Uncle Benny's family as part of any custody arrangement. Tyler and Madison cheered at this announcement, apparently having been hoping for more time with their cousin Sophie. The children's enthusiasm provided a bright contrast to the adult drama surrounding them. Can Sophie come swimming at our new house? Madison asked Robert hopefully. Sophie will always be welcome wherever I live, Robert replied firmly. And she'll never have to worry about dress codes or gift table hierarchies. Diana's social facade continued crumbling as the party guests began making their excuses and departure plans. The elaborate celebration she had planned to showcase her elevated status had become a public exposure of her character flaws that would follow her throughout the Riverside Heights community. James approached me with additional legal documents. Benny, I need you to sign these papers authorizing the immediate transfer of your inherited assets. Diana will be required to liquidate investments to cover the distribution, which should be completed within 30 days. I looked at Diana, who appeared to be processing the complete destruction of everything she had been working to build. Part of me felt sorry for her remembering the sister who had once helped me with homework and shared secrets about boys she liked. But a larger part of me recognized that protecting Sophie meant standing firm against family members who had lost their way. Diana, I said quietly, pulling her aside from the dispersing crowd. This doesn't have to destroy our relationship permanently, but it has to change fundamentally. She looked up at me with tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I never meant for things to go this far. You told people we were dead. You stole money that belonged to us. You humiliated my 8-year-old daughter in front of strangers. I know, she whispered. I got caught up in trying to fit into this world and I lost track of what actually mattered. Mom and Dad would want us to find a way back to being family. I continued. But that's only possible if you're willing to do the hard work of remembering who they raised you to be. Grace approached us with Sophie, whose earlier tears had been replaced by the resilience that comes from seeing adults stand up for what's right. Diana. Sophie said with the startling directness of children, I still love you, but I didn't like how you made me feel about my dress. The simple honesty of an 8-year-old's feedback accomplished what hours of adult confrontation had not. Diana knelt down to Sophie's level, with genuine remorse replacing her defensive posturing. Sophie, I'm so sorry. Your dress is beautiful, and I was wrong to say anything that made you feel bad about it." "It's okay," Sophie replied, with the quick forgiveness that children offer when adults genuinely apologize. "Next time, maybe you could just say you like my dress, instead of talking about stores." Climactic twist. Dr. Sarah Martinez. The child psychologist Diana had hired to provide expert childcare during the party, approached us with obvious concern. "Excuse me, but I've been observing the family interactions today as part of my professional responsibilities." Diana, "I'm ethically required to inform you that what I witnessed constitutes emotional abuse of a child, and I'll be filing a mandatory report with Child Protective Services." However, she continued looking at Grace and me. "I'd also like to offer my services to help your family heal from this experience. Children who see adults stand up for them often emerge stronger, but professional support can help ensure Sophie processes this in healthy ways." 6 months later, I stood in our newly renovated kitchen, watching Sophie help Grace prepare dinner for our extended family gathering. The inheritance money had allowed us to pay off our mortgage and add a dining room addition that could accommodate the larger family meals that had become our monthly tradition. But more importantly, it had provided the security that let us focus on relationships rather than financial stress. Diana arrived precisely at 6 o'clock with Tyler and Madison, carrying a homemade dessert that looked slightly lopsided but smelled incredible. Her court-mandated family counseling had been challenging, but transformative, teaching her to reconnect with the values our parents had instilled before social ambition clouded her judgment. "Aunt Diana," Sophie called out, running to embrace her with the natural affection that children restore once trust is rebuilt through consistent actions. "Hello, sweetheart," Diana replied, kneeling to Sophie's level with the genuine warmth that had taken months to redevelop. "I love your dress today. Did you pick it out yourself?" Sophie beamed with pride at having her choices celebrated rather than criticized. "Grace took me shopping, and I chose the purple one because purple is my power color." "Purple is definitely your color," Diana agreed, and I could see she meant it without reservation. The legal resolution of the estate fraud had required Diana to sell her Riverside Heights mansion and move to a modest townhouse that better reflected her actual financial situation after divorce proceedings. But the smaller space had brought unexpected benefits, forcing her to focus on relationships rather than impressive entertaining. Robert had followed through on his commitment to maintaining family connections. He joined us for holidays and birthday celebrations, bringing his new girlfriend who treated Sophie with the same respect she showed Tyler and Madison. The children had adapted to their parents' separation with remarkable resilience, especially once they understood that family relationships could continue in healthier forms. James had become a regular presence in our lives as well, using his legal expertise to help Grace navigate the expansion of her daycare program. Eleanor's foundation funding had allowed Little Sprouts to serve 60 additional families, and Grace was considering opening a second location to meet growing demand. Dr. Martinez had provided crucial support during the months immediately following the party incident. Sophie had needed professional help processing the experience of being publicly humiliated by a family member, but she had also gained confidence from seeing her parents stand up for her dignity and worth. The most important thing for Sophie to understand, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our family sessions, is that standing up to bullying behavior, even from family members, is not just appropriate, but necessary for healthy relationships. Sophie had internalized this lesson in ways that made me proud. When a classmate had criticized her homemade Halloween costume, she had calmly responded that creativity was more important than expensive store-bought alternatives. When another child had mocked her family's modest car during school pickup, she had confidently shared that her parents chose to spend money on experiences and education rather than impressive vehicles. The monthly family dinners had become opportunities for all of us to practice authentic relationships. Diana's children learned that happiness could come from simple activities like board games and backyard camping rather than expensive entertainment. Sophie gained cousins who valued her creativity and kindness, rather than judging her possessions. Eleanor had become an unexpected mentor to our entire family. Her foundation work had taught her to recognize genuine community service versus performative charity, and she delighted in supporting people who demonstrated authentic care for others. The most effective philanthropy, she had explained during one of her visits to Grace's expanded daycare, comes from people who understand struggle personally and choose to help others navigate similar challenges. Grace's work with working families had become her calling in ways that surprised both of us. The foundation funding allowed her to hire additional staff and create programs that addressed whole family needs rather than just childcare. Evening classes for parents, weekend family activities, and emergency support services had transformed Little Sprouts into a genuine community resource. Patricia had also become an unexpected ally. Her initial interest in our family's authenticity had developed into genuine friendship, and she used her social connections to advocate for Grace's programs among other philanthropic organizations. The ripple effects of that terrible birthday party had ultimately created positive changes none of us could have anticipated. Diana's forced honesty about her deceptions had freed her from the exhausting performance of maintaining lies. Tyler and Madison had gained a healthier understanding of family loyalty and authentic relationships. Sophie had learned that adults who love her would fight for her dignity, even when that meant confronting difficult family dynamics. As we gathered around the dinner table that evening, I looked at the faces of people who had learned to choose truth over convenience, kindness over social advancement, and authentic connection over impressive performance. Before we eat, Sophie announced with 8-year-old authority, "I want to say what I'm grateful for." We joined hands around the table as she began her list. "I'm grateful for my dress, that I picked myself for cousins who like my homemade gifts for Aunt Diana, learning to be nice again for Grace's big daycare that helps lots of families, and for Dad, teaching me that standing up to bullies is always the right thing to do." Diana squeezed Sophie's hand with tears in her eyes. "I'm grateful for second chances, and for a family that didn't give up on me, even when I gave them every reason to." Grace added her gratitude for Eleanor's support and the opportunity to serve families who needed advocates in their corner. I concluded with appreciation for the lesson our parents had somehow taught us, even after their deaths, that protecting the people we love sometimes means having difficult conversations and setting firm boundaries, but that authentic forgiveness becomes possible when people demonstrate genuine change through consistent actions. The conversation that followed dinner covered everything from Tyler's science fair project to Madison's soccer team victories to Sophie's latest art creation. Normal family topics that felt precious because we had almost lost the opportunity to share them. Later that evening, as Grace and I cleaned dishes while the children played board games in the living room, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. "Do you think we handled everything right?" I asked Grace, who had been my anchor throughout the most challenging months of our marriage. "I think we protected Sophie while leaving space for healing," she replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior until they're ready to change." Mom and Dad would be proud of how this turned out. They would be proud that we fought for family values instead of just talking about them. Our parents had left us more than financial inheritance. They had provided the moral foundation that allowed us to recognize authentic love versus manipulative performance, and the courage to choose difficult truth over convenient lies. Standing up for Sophie's dignity had required confronting family dynamics we had avoided for years. But the result had been relationships built on honesty rather than social positioning, and children who understood that real family support meant celebrating each other's authentic selves rather than demanding conformity to external expectations. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating your children poorly? How do you balance family loyalty with protecting your child's emotional well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to support authentic family stories that address real challenges parents face. Subscribe to our channel for more narratives about finding courage in difficult family situations and protecting the people we love. Share this story with friends who might need encouragement to advocate for their children's dignity, even when it means having hard conversations with relatives. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal story about learning that sometimes the most loving action is setting firm boundaries with family members who have lost their way. I wish you the strength to protect your children's self-worth and the wisdom to build relationships based on authentic care rather than social performance.